was flying, now I'm falling short again. I've been dodging all my friends. Tell me where this is. Peaks and valleys. I've been crying, I've been heavy on myself. I took my pride on off that shelf. Admit I need some help. Round and around I go, all in my head. Racing my thoughts, I reveal my own heart, and I'm scared to go on any further. But there ain't no savior to save me from you. And there ain't no temple to hide all my truth. I ain't got nobody, no one to take me away. I made this bed, so right here is where I'm gonna lay. But I say fuck these problems. One day I'll set 'em ablaze, and every illusion and every mistake goes up in flames. Round and around I go, all in my head. Yeah. Racing my thoughts, I reveal my own heart. It's a shame that I waited this long. 'Cause there ain't no savior to save me from you. And there ain't no temple to hide all my truth. Said ain't no choir gonna sing my song. Ain't nobody gonna carry my cross. I ain't no saint or sinner. I ain't wrong. Said ain't no choir gonna sing my song. Ain't nobody gonna carry my cross. I ain't no saint or sinner. I ain't wrong. Peaks and valleys. I've been crying, I've been heavy on myself. I took my pride on off that shelf. There ain't no savior to save me from you. And there ain't no temple, I just gotta walk. Oh my, peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys. Oh my, peaks and valleys, my peaks and valleys.
Good evening, everyone. It is so wonderful being with you. Welcome to another second Monday conversation with Urban Consulate Cincinnati. My name is Naima Bilal, and I will be your host this evening. And one of the interlocutors of our conversation tonight, and one of actually our guests. We are joined in a conversation that is not only an old one that we have had for decades and hundreds of years, but we're having a conversation around racial solidarity, which has reached a fever pitch. And oftentimes, so much of this conversation is framed between a Black and brown minority, and a white majority, and the power struggle that comes into play when examining those conditions. And when we talk about solidarity, we often name some of the barriers that get in the way of solidarity. And sometimes that conversation can feel uncomfortable. And so tonight's conversation is an invitation to a different kind of dialogue than we are accustomed to here in Urban Consulate. Typically, we have a question interview format that is pretty, it's created and thought carefully about, so that we bring to you some thoughtful dialogue. Tonight, the invitation is to stretch ourselves, and through deep engagement and deep listening, have a more vulnerable conversation within the lens, or through the lens, of racial solidarity. And tonight, we are joined by three extraordinary Cincinnatians, and we're going to have a dialogue where we're learning together. We're learning out loud together, and placing ourselves, self-selecting ourselves into a more vulnerable place. So with that, I am so excited to welcome our guests this evening. First, I will start with Peace. Peace is an artist. He is a DJ. He is a producer and poet for this generation. Born in Cleveland, Peace has called Cincinnati home for the past several years, where he creates culture for the people. Witty wordplay is a signature of Peace's art, and he offers a nostalgic, reminiscent style, a style reminiscent of the Harlem Renaissance. Peace is part of Tribe, a multifaceted, creative collective of artists seeking to promote positive urban culture and spawn a new Renaissance. Peace, welcome to Urban Consulate.
What's going on? Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be here. I'm excited. Something that I've longed for as far as conversation, something that I look for is always how do we become solidarity as far as a unit together. So I'm just looking forward to this conversation. And there's some great people that we're having this conversation with. So looking forward to it.
No doubt. Well, speaking of other people, I am so happy to welcome Mary Burke Rivers. Mary Burke Rivers is born and raised Cincinnatian, and for the past 24 years, Mary Burke Rivers has served as the executive director of the Over the Rhine community of Over the Rhine Community Housing, where she's led efforts to develop affordable housing and community in Cincinnati's Over the Rhine neighborhood. Mary is a fierce advocate and humble spirit, and has been a grounding and stable presence in efforts around housing in Cincinnati for a very long time. Mary has much wisdom, and she has much to share with us this evening with regard to building solidarity, in particular in transitional neighborhoods. She is a leader that many of us have a lot to learn from. Mary, welcome.
Thanks, Naima, for the introduction. It's an honor to be here and to be invited by the Urban Consulate. I admire and respect so much what you all do. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for being here. And I am so excited to welcome my fellow co-host alongside G. Horton, Miss Megan Trischler. Megan Trischler is a designer and spiritual director. Megan accompanies people in their spiritual journeys and walks alongside individuals wishing to bring new things into the world. Born in Flint, Michigan, and educated in Detroit, Megan's work and heart has taken her to cities across the world where she has helped shape and launch a number of participatory projects in both rural and urban communities. Megan is a co-host of Urban Consulate and also leads Room to Notice, I might add, another Urban Consulate Cincinnati program, and spends most of her time tending the flocks of her faith community and neighbors in East Price Hill. Meg, welcome.
Thank you, Naima. It's a pleasure. So good to be here too with you, Mary and Peace. This is going to be great.
So one thing that I didn't mention is Meg's gift of the word. And when I say gift of word, Meg has a truly profound gift to identify text and literature that speaks to a moment and that can help ground us in our purpose. And so I'm going to turn it over to Meg now, who is going to share a piece with us to help open up the floodgates of vulnerability around our racial solidarity conversation. Meg.
Thank you, Naima. You're so kind. It's good to be with everybody. As Naima mentioned, we've been doing a practice here with the Urban Consulate called Room to Notice, which essentially is a contemplative practice. We usually ground in a poem, and the invitation is just to sort of reflect and find a space of stillness. So that's a important practice that I've come to really enjoy doing with the Urban Consulate family. So I was thrilled to get a chance to just sort of offer a reading, an invitation for our gathering here tonight. Some of you might know this work. It's been floating around for the past maybe 3 or 4 years. This is a piece written by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. If you know Mickey, you would know that she calls herself a justice doula. She's a part of the Faith Matters Network and just a real activist and really lovely human. So this is Mickey's work called An Invitation to Brave Space, which felt fitting for our conversation tonight. An invitation to brave space. Together we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. So again, that's Mickey Scott Bay Jones, An Invitation to Brave Space.
Thank you, Meg. Let's be brave together. Before we wade in what I have heard referred to as the stream of bravery, let's do some definitions. Because just what are we really talking about when we use the word solidarity? So I'm going to start with you, Peace. What is your working, personal, maybe changing, shifting definition of solidarity?
I think solidarity is something that is ever changing and it's evolving, but it's being open to invite others to the table and be able to listen, to see what it is that's needed for everyone to be able to be on an equal playing field. So that may look different from 10 years from now to today. But I think if we always have an open ear and we're always willing to listen and also invite everybody to the table and have them be able to discuss and explain what it is that solidarity means for them, and kind of just defining it for everyone and making sure that these needs are being met for everyone equally.
Beautiful. Oh, are you okay?
Yeah.
So first of all, I'm glad you're okay. And secondly, I just want to add a little bit more, levity to the evening by just loving on this colorful, beautiful jacket that you're wearing.
Oh, word. Thank
It is a work of art.
you. Yeah. From the thrift too.
Oh, even better.
Yep.
Mary, solidarity, working definition.
For me, it's that we're tied up in this together. So when I think of solidarity, immediately I think of labor movements and what it means in that world. Again, that world tied together. And when you're hurting, I'm hurting. When you're doing well and I'm doing well, it's the greater good, not the individual, but the greater good. And it means not crossing a picket line. It means marching. It means not buying certain products or certain foods, not buying grapes years ago when the grape workers were asking that we not buy grapes. So those are things that come to mind for me. It's that we're connected, and I'm with you, and I can count on you to be with me.
Beautiful. Meg?
Yeah, I just want to build off that. You used the word, Mary, that has been just in my heart all week, and that's just a withness. I think to be in solidarity is to be with. And another word that's been just kind of in my heart this week is to dwell with, to dwell near and to be with. So that's what comes to mind for me, just thinking about the word solidarity.
Yeah.
What about you, Naima?
Well, so look, I was about to say something. In my mind, solidarity means little without agreement. Solidarity has little context and little meaning without some single orienting truth that is shared. And so in that way, it is certainly a withness. There is certainly an alignment. And the way I examine solidarity in my own life today, that process is really fraught, right? Because when I layer on the racial solidarity, when I marry those two words together, I realize that some of my work is seeking agreement that racism exists, that white supremacy exists. And I just got to be honest. I don't have the energy or the personal interest in seeking agreement that those two things exist. And yet, I do also understand that part of the process of gaining solidarity is bringing people along on the journey. Now, certainly not people who aren't even on the chessboard, right, of solidarity. But the way I think of that, there's work involved in solidarity because you're seeking agreement. And when you're seeking agreement, that implies, that there is this sort of robust exchange of ideas, So for me, there are a lot of positive things I derive from that, but in practice, the practice of solidarity, getting there, it's not always work that I have energy to do, if I'm being frank. I know it's work that we must. So here we are with these different definitions. So I think for me, I'm always trying to interrogate Well, Naima, just what do you really do
Mm.
to achieve solidarity, and just what are you contributing to finding agreement with people who can help turn this thing around? And when I say this thing, I'm talking about racism and white supremacy. How do you guys conceive of your place
Hmm.
in achieving racial solidarity? And what's the scope? Like, in my mind, it's dizzying if I don't focus it in on my sphere of influence and the people who I interact with. I get overwhelmed sometimes. So how do you
Mhm.
guys step into the place of, yeah, interrogating your own role in achieving that without overwhelming yourself? What does that even look like?
I think it all starts with trying, right? You don't know until you are able to try something. Also, there is no, we don't have the answers, so we have to put our best foot forward. We have to begin to try to lead with someone that we may not know and understanding that person. If not, then we're just going to continue to go into circles. We're going to continue to find ourselves within the same places, having these same conversations, because we haven't had the time to become vulnerable, ask what is needed from others, and also figure out what is needed for ourselves. So when we do have these conversations, we can begin to grow, and because we know what we need, and we can begin to find common ground. But I do think it begins with trying, and I think it starts very small, just like this conversation right here. We don't know each other, but we are here and we're becoming vulnerable and we're beginning to speak to each other and we're trying to find out and figure it out. And if we begin to have this on our scales, if I take this home with me, if I begin to have these conversations with the people that I am around, then we will begin to start breaking down barriers even more. So I think it starts with us, and it has started because this is what this conversation is. But it has to continue. It continues at our dinner tables. It continues when we're at work. So let's not. We should be speaking it into life in all of the different ways that are all of the different encounters that we're coming into, but also being vulnerable ourselves and knowing that we may have some biases ourselves, but being able to say, I can recognize this, and I'm also able to listen, and see if there's something that I need to change or what can I change to help make sure that we are becoming equal.
Mm. Yeah, just to kind of build, Peace, thanks for that. Naima, I'm just struck by actually what a great question it is to ask one's definition of what is racial solidarity, or what does solidarity mean to you. That strikes me as like, I mean, you might not get invited to many dinner parties if that's your lead-in question, but that strikes me as like a really good question. But I think to build off what Peace is saying, and Naima, to touch on what you're saying too, I think there is a real excavation of sort of like what I heard you say, Naima, is like, so when it's coming to seeking agreement or alignment, it's predicated on the fact that we're going to have some kind of shared truth, or we're going to hold something to be common. Mm-hmm. And I hear what you're saying in that, like, sometimes there is just not time to bring people to this place because that's not worth your energy. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, I'm starting to maybe get a sense of like, where do I focus, and to whom do I feel led to be in solidarity with and working towards solidarity with? And I think each of us are wired differently. Some of us are going to be more inclined to be on the front lines, to be active, marching and leading and being an activist. Some of us are going to be more bridge builder types who really want to have an in-depth conversation with very few people. Some of us are going to be more of those agitators who are just posting stuff like crazy and trying to get the masses to see. And so I think it's a good for each of us to just sort of be mindful of sort of not just where do we play, like what domain, what are our work environs, but how are we wired, and are we kind of called to be bridge builders? Are we called to be activists? What are those different ways that you can kind of engage in it? So that's sort of where my mind goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate what Peace said about the trying, because as a person who's white with privilege, um, if it's too hard, I could just say I'm not going to try, um, because yeah, my life will be okay, it seems, without it. So I think, or even afraid to try because afraid I'll mess up. That's more it, I think. I don't want to be a stupid white person, so I'm afraid to try something or say something for fear of looking bad. So I can start slowly with people I feel safe with, and doing my own education to understand, because I didn't pick it up in school or in the media or in our culture, the history of our country and how unjust it has been over many, many decades, and how it all leads to where we are today, that it's all been leading up to this. So what allowed someone to enslave another human being and torture them doesn't go away in a generation. Like, that mindset doesn't go away, and it continues on. And when we deny it, of course, it's going to continue to exist until we shine the light on it, and then the real work begins. And I think that's where some of us are now. We're having a deeper appreciation and understanding of racism in this country and white privilege. And now it's, what's the action? Because I think solidarity too needs to be about action. Talking, and although listening and talking and reading is so very important, it has to lead to some action too.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned fear. And I can just give a really recent example of my feeling of fear. I have a couple of examples, actually. If I'm making myself very vulnerable, I just put a Black Lives Matter placard in front of my house. I live in a neighborhood in Cincinnati called Kennedy Heights, which is glorious. And just full disclosure, most everybody on my street has a Black Lives Matter sign. And I thought to myself, oh, well, I'd love to demonstrate my solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. Of course, it comes down to much more than a yard sign. I get that. But I thought to myself, well, I'd like to put a Black Lives Matter bumper sticker on my car. And there was a moment where I felt, on one hand, it was like, yeah, this would be a great demonstration of your solidarity with a movement, at least an outward demonstration of that. And then I was overcome with fear for one reason. I had just read, an article about some of the violence that Proud Boy-like organizations have wreaked upon communities. And I thought, no, don't put yourself at risk like that, Naima. And what it did was it brought me back to this place of being paralyzed by the fear. And again, I want to emphasize that solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement is far greater than the sum of a bumper sticker. The point I'm trying to illustrate is that sometimes our expressions of solidarity can be tempered by fear, and outright, shaped by fear.
Yeah.
Does that have any resonance with you?
Yeah, you use a word in there I think is really key, which is risk. And, there's a lot of, we talked a little bit, this group has talked a little bit about sort of allyship versus accompliceship. And there's a lot of, just dialogue around that, right now. And, when I think about the difference, I guess, between, sort of being an accomplice and an ally, a risk is the word that comes up often. You know, there's a cost. There's a potential. You're putting yourself in the way in some instances. You know, to stand with it, as you said, Mary. It is getting beyond listening and learning. It is getting beyond sort of the sort of social media posts and the sort of acts of like perceived solidarity or even sort of demonstrations of solidarity. And I think to actually be in solidarity, it just strikes me that there is a real cost, and the cost is like, this is a risk. So yeah, I don't have a point there except to say that word that you share, Naima, I think is an important one, you know. What to do with that? How do we choose to respond?
Right.
When we know it could cost us something.
And you know, it's interesting because when I put myself, when I acknowledge my fear, what I throw it up against is the fear of my ancestors. Okay, let's just keep it really real. The fear of my ancestors when they understood the risk of stealing their own bodies from their slave holders, right? And then I think, Naima, like, seriously, get over it. Like, you're going to demonstrate solidarity with a movement and you're worried about a freaking bumper sticker? Get over it. And then I think about civil rights leaders who, at the peril of death, at its most extreme, and peril of injury, loss of, you know, any of their faculties, you know, loss of so much, you know, their risk, they calculated it, and it was, you know, they were willing to make it, to put those things on the line. And so as I'm interrogating sort of my own, as a Black woman, I mean, like, you gotta understand, like, this dialogue for me is, it doesn't rest comfortably within me to know that my fear has sort of tempered how I demonstrate solidarity. So I don't know, it's just, yeah, risk taking, but relative to what kind of risk taking? And then I further think, you guys need to jump in, because look, I'm a Gemini, y'all. I can go all day.
I can listen to you. Keep going, Naima. This is great.
But what I mean is, you know, I have a question for Mary, which is, you know, how do you position your level of risk when you demonstrate solidarity, not against, but alongside a person of color that you know? How do you interrogate that?
I'll try to answer, and tell me if I'm responding to your question. What came to mind was a couple of things. One is sort of the freedom of having nothing to lose, or less to lose, makes it easier. So I'm thinking about, in my experience at work, over the years, over the Ryan Community Housing, and sometimes, okay, I'm going back to 2001 when Timothy Thomas was shot and killed, and being an active participant in those protests and marches, and speaking at City Hall, and well, shoot, over the years doing other things too, but it didn't feel like I had as much to lose as I have now. So I don't know, I was single, you know, no family member counting on me, or and the things that I think I could have risked or lost would have been, yeah, what would I have lost? I mean, you know, employment, or done damage to Over the Rhine Community Housing's reputation because I was out there protesting or making statements that made people angry. So I think I've gotten somewhat more conservative in not wanting to make the wrong or the right people angry, because of the risk to how to impact Over the Rhine Community Housing.
Yeah.
So those are the things that come to mind, but I don't know if that's an answer to what you were getting at. I mean, I think I still challenge, but it's in different settings. And sometimes too, you just get tired of the same challenge over and over and over again. So maybe I don't challenge as much as I used to because I'm tired of the same challenge over and over and over again. And that's mostly related to housing and affordable housing and the narrative of Over the Rhine that talks about Over the Rhine as if it was nothing, before 3CDC came, and that there was no community, there was no people who cared for each other, there was nothing of value there. So I will challenge that on a pretty regular basis, but the venue to do it isn't as available to us as it is. Yeah, there's not often a venue to express those ideas or counter to the narrative.
Can I ask a question? Just because that's really interesting to me what Mary's saying. Like, has there been a relational cost for you all? Like to act in solidarity, to speak truth where truth needs to be shared? Does anyone have any? Because if I'm honest, those are some of my fear, talk about fear. It's maybe the relational cost in some way. I hear that in what you're saying, Mary, but yeah, has that been reality for any of you?
It has for me. I've taken a lot of risk by kind of just being open-minded and trying to work with everybody. There's a lot of times where you can get, people can look down on you or look at you a certain way and say, oh, you're trying to work with the oppressor. You're trying to work with the person that has put you into a position where you're at now. This person has lied to you. These people are manipulative, all of these different things. Why are you working with them? And you're taking a risk because it may taint your reputation within your community. And that's really important with our egos, right? We want to feel very comfortable, at least in the places that we call home. So I think that's why these conversations, once again, are very important, because if you're not doing it, then it won't be done. And then also, if you know that it's supposed to be done within your heart, I think you should always go with what you know is good within your heart, and not go against the grain and worry about what others think. Usually that is how we come into like a sheep mentality, when we stop thinking for ourselves and we stop doing what it is that we feel. And ultimately, when we just go against ourselves, period, it's not healthy for yourself or for others. So I think that's just a realization, once again, of us and myself. I had to make a humongous realization. I had to look myself in the mirror many of times. And there's always even times I've thought that I'm like, oh, well, what if we were in position of power? Will we rule? And even, is that right? Knowing that it's not right when it's being done to me. So moving forward, if I really want to create a world that I would like to enjoy, I still wouldn't want one particular race to dominate. But how do we all hold hands and then lead together? So yeah, many risk, specifically with reputation, honestly, being an activist, being somebody that's on the forefronts, and knowing that a lot of people are watching me, a lot of people are looking at what I am doing. So to be open-minded, to be able to have conversations and to kind of break the ice, is something that I look forward to doing now, is because I know it's the work that I need to be doing, right? And it's the risk. And after you kind of get uncomfortable with it, it feels well, because I'm speaking to people like yourselves. And now we're here and we're unraveling and we're unpacking and we're trying to figure something out. And we have an audience that are in the same boat as us. And this can spark a conversation that they may have outside of what we are doing. And this is how it begins.
What about you, Naima, on that question around like relational, reputational costs?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And some of the cost has had like an enduring and lasting pain because they've come in the form of lost friendships, or at least what I thought were friendships. Um, but at the end of the day, we all have a threshold of what we think we can support in another person's sort of belief, um, sets of beliefs. So I give a very concrete example. I I have a lot of police officers in my family. My uncle was who is now passed. He was a one of the guardsmen on Capitol Hill in the Library of Congress. Um, I also lost another uncle who was a police officer, and he was tragically murdered when trying to help a woman in need. I mean, it was absolutely tragic. So I say that to say that my abiding love and respect for the men in my family, set aside their professions for a minute, just the men in my family, just created an association with me with like honor and police, being a police officer. So I had that association. I was very proud of my uncle for being one of the most prominent people you'd see when you go into the Library of Congress. I was very proud of my other uncle who he served his community so well. And yet when I began to post very openly on Facebook about the murder of Breonna Taylor, about the murder of Tamir Rice, about the lynching of George Floyd. At every one of those inflection points, I lost friendships. And part of my North Star is just human connection, like finding a lasting connection with people that, in spite of the challenges that might create some static or friction, they endure. Because we're, as human beings, we thrive in groups and we thrive in community. And that's just something I'm always seeking in my life. And so for me, those were tragedies. But I'd been well practiced in that. I grew up in a hybrid religious household. My mother, Christian, my father, Muslim. And I'll never forget what it felt like to ostracize myself when I, told my community members, like, look, I don't believe, I believe that LGBTQA Muslims are just as much a part of our community as any other Muslim. And so, even as a teenager, I was losing friends left and right for speaking to my North Star. And so, like Peace, you said something that really struck me, which was, I think it was something about, acting based on who we are and what lies at our core. And so long as that doesn't shift, you'll always know where you belong, even if you lose your friends. And even if it means, in your case, Peace, I think you said it may put your reputation at risk. So I've been, it's painful, but it's just one of the consequences that I'm learning more and more is just, these casualties, they happen. You step into that space.
And that just sparked a thought. And a lot of times I begin to think of, your whys, right? And there is some pain that we have to suffer, but there was so much pain that brought this situation here. And oftentimes I begin to look at that as well. Yes, I may lose a few friends, but there has been lives lost. There's been families lost. There's been generations that have suffered. So I also look at it in a perspective of that as well. To keep me charged, like, this is my why. These are the reasons, because we always talk about it. I think, getting to the youth, and being able to change the youth and the minds of the youth is very important. And that's why we're creating these sacrifices, because
Mm.
someone sacrificed. There was Black and white people that were sacrificing in the 50s, in the 40s, in the 30s, in the 20s, if we want to keep dating back, in order for us to even get here. And realizing that there was some type of solidarity to get us to this specific point right now for us to even have this conversation.
Mm.
So we had to continue to push that forward and push that narrative. And I had a confidence that we are changing, and we are learning, and we are moving, and the generation that is under us will have it better. It may not be, exactly what it is that we want, but what in life is. But we know that the changes that we are making now is for a better future. And I think that is very charging, right? It's also is motivating as well. And especially when you are in rooms like this with people who are thinking the same and that don't look like you as well. It's very refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think too, just, I think there is a difference between pain and harm, and pain, though nobody wants to experience it, childbirth is pain, labor pain is a real thing. And it's a stretching of our capacity. It's an expanding. There's different metaphors you could use there. So I think that's one of the things that I sense that I'm learning is like, yes, it is hard. Yes, it will be difficult. Yes, there will be challenge. Yes, there will be pushback. Yes, you might lose things and it will hurt. But there are ways in which sometimes I think that I confuse hurt with harm. And I think to some extent I'm wanting to, not for the sake of experiencing pain, but to trust that there might be something on the other side of that pain that we just can't yet imagine. And it might look like new life.
Mm.
It might look like birth.
Mm.
So
Look, I was just like, look, we know that you're a spiritual leader, Meg. You
Yeah.
took us like straight to church.
That was really good.
that was the word that I needed. Thank you. On the other side of that might be life.
Right.
Mm.
Right. And who are we to hold that back?
Right.
And so like when we speak about fear, I mean, yeah, our body, we have natural tendencies to like, that's hot, don't touch it. There's real things there, but I think sometimes, and maybe that's when I think about solidarity and like, who are we on the journey with? I need I need the people to keep saying, keep walking, keep going. It's hard, but it won't kill you. Keep going, So yeah.
Mm.
Solidarity is like childbirth.
It can be, right?
Well,
Right.
what's really interesting about that is that, it is a stretch, right? Sometimes that can feel like you don't know what's going to happen. Are you going to stretch yourself to death? And indeed, some people have.
Yeah.
We know that there are freedom fighters in all of the human rights, social justice, racial equity movements that have perished and that have died for stretching. So we know that to be true. And yet, if enough of us do it, how much protection is there in numbers? And so I think about that when I consider my own place. Like, look, let's just keep it very real. I'm a Black woman who works in the philanthropic space, in the nonprofit space. And I'm always interrogating how I demonstrate solidarity unapologetically.
Mm.
And actually, for the first time in my entire philanthropic career, and this just feels like heartrending to say, but it's true. For the first time in my, career, I feel unabashedly empowered to speak truth. I feel a sense of freedom that not a lot of people may feel, especially in the workplace. So I'm kind of shifting the conversation here to like practical everyday speaking truth to power, but just speaking truth, naming the things. So I acknowledge that as a privilege, right? And yet that same setting doesn't exist in all of the spaces that I occupy in my life, but it's a significant one. And so I use that as, you could call, my solidarity gym. And I'm in that gym all day long, talking about what we can do to not just eradicate racism and white supremacy in our world, but how we do it through a certain lens of the work that I'm doing, right? And I take those muscles that I'm using to say those same things in other spaces. And so there's something to say for, frankly, having the feeling of being safe enough to say the things, and contrasting that with not feeling as safe. And I tell you what, the more and more I do it, the more and more I couldn't care less what people think, you know? And so when I talk about losing friendships, I'm sad to lose friendships. And yet, if amplifying the voices of those who can't speak, amplifying the voices of those who have been murdered at the hands of police officers, is helping this groundswell of voices coming together to make create the urgency that we need, right? To save Black and brown lives. I mean, let's just let's be frank, and all of our lives, right? But if that helps, then this, the cost is not necessarily worth it, but it's a cost that I accept. And that, that's a heartrending thing to say. It's absolute. It sounds very cold, actually. Okay, so here's what I'm going to ask you. So Peace, you're an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And you live, breathe, sleep, eat artistry every day. And in some ways, we've talked about this on the consulate, how artistic expression is a wonderful channel for expressing and reflecting and mirroring back inequities in the world. Do you feel as if you have the platform you need or platform you desire to speak truth?
I think that we don't have the one that I desire, but we have earned a platform that people are listening.
Yeah.
And it wasn't easy though. It wasn't handed to us. It was something that, you kind of had to pull your pants up by the shoestrings, kind of get dirty. A lot of the times that we had resistance, there were different policies that we were facing that was trying to stop us from serving the community. And, you didn't know of these type of problems when you first are entering into these things that you're doing. But once you begin to learn, you see that there is resistance. But using art also, I think it kind of helps break the soil, and it makes it easier for you to plant a seed. Because you're coming with maybe music, you're coming with painting, you're coming with something that someone can relate to, but it may even break them down and may have them look at something in an abstract way instead of something so direct. And it can give them something that they can relate to. And I think that's really important as well. Even when we're thinking about solving problems, how are we creatively solving these problems? How are we making it not only easy for us, but enjoyable for us, to want to have these conversations, to have these deep conversations, to have these buildings of trust. I think that's another thing that is being lacked within all of us. When we begin to talk with each other, we don't trust each other. There's a lot of times when I've even heard some problems like, oh, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem, but we're not really listening. We're pushing it to the side, or we're not even giving people the opportunity to help themselves and be able to give them the resources so they can ultimately help themselves. I think that's really another sign of solidarity too. I don't want to have to fix anyone else's problem, but I would love to create resources and outlets so one can help themselves, because that's the ultimate goal. We don't want anyone under or over anybody, but if we can all give each other these resources, and we can make it to the promised land, as it were.
Mm. Here's to the promised land. Hey, Mary. So, look, I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but I'm going to steal one of your questions.
Okay.
Here's the thing, like, I have to, because it's such a profoundly, like, thoughtful question. In particular, because to me, it kind of did. Okay, I'm just going to say the question. Look, me and the buildups. Your question, Mary, was, as a landlord, now you're in your role, right? You are effectively a landlord for many, many residents of the Over the Rhine neighborhood. And so your question was, when I'm in a position of power, with power over people I serve or work with, or who let their properties from me, how do I how do I even begin to demonstrate solidarity when there is a power imbalance? I just thought that was a very profound question, and I'm asking it, even though I think the point of you asking it was to get maybe some advice. Or I don't
Tell
know.
us, Mary. Tell us the answer.
But I mean, I think if we
Really.
plumb the depths of that kind of question, like, that's where the work is, right? So what is an answer to that?
Okay. An answer could be, let's see, well, I think that there is an answer in there, and I think it is about, systemic issues. So that people, like so many people in our buildings, so 474 units, 474 families and individuals, not, yeah. I mean, we like to feel like we're in this together. And I mean, I think that's the culture that we have set with our organization. But the reality is, not me, in theory, I could file an eviction and you could lose your home. So, I mean, that the only way to change that dynamic, I suppose, is, that people own their own stuff so that they don't have to worry about, having to pay someone else. But then you have to pay the bank. Housing is a commodity instead of a right. So as you can see, I'm stumbling, but I hope that what we try to really is a culture of this is ours, But so when I walk through the neighborhood, it feels really good because I know lots of folks and lots of people know me, and will challenge me, and we'll have conversations that feel real. But I don't know really how I'm viewed as this white tall woman. Is it like, oh, there's she's my landlord? I guess it came home to a point to me where a longtime resident, I shared with you guys, Alice, who lived in one of our apartments for a very long time. And she called me a couple years ago and left a voicemail that a realtor was out in front of her home looking at the building. And she wanted to know if we were selling and if she was going to lose her home, and if I could just tell her so she can prepare. So Alice is someone who I felt like I was in solidarity with. We had gone on activities together, done different things that different programs, we did things together, and I was like, wow, that Alice would think that I would do that. speaks to this power dynamic. And she's an African-American woman. I'm a white woman. She's older than me, so I'm sure she's experienced this kind of racism her entire life. More dramatic maybe when she was younger, I don't know, but I don't know.
I'd like to chime in real quick. I
Okay.
think you mentioned it earlier. You were saying that there's really a systematic thing that's in place, right? That's kind of holding things in a certain way. And I think one thing that can be done on a small scale is, certain things, creating a platform to speak about those things, to change some of those things. Are there unfair housing laws that are going on right now that you see? And maybe some people that are similar to you that are landlords. And when I know if I was a tenant and my landlord is fighting for better housing laws, I would feel a lot more solid with them. And it kind of is like you're going above and beyond, even though you're kind of collecting from me. I know that you're with me because you're seeing the long game. You want to make sure that I am benefiting not just for today, but thriving for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's just something small that just popped into my head that I think would kind of even make a difference. Like if we know that there are some laws that's out here, what can we do to redirect those laws so they are more fair?
Yeah, it's so much of it seems to come down to trust, doesn't it? Like there's a sense of, trust-based relationships. And I've had a little bit, not in the same way you have, Mary, but I up until a couple years ago, I've spent most of my life in nonprofit space and philanthropy, like you, Naima. And even in, here in Cincinnati, we developed a project called People's Liberty, which was giving grants to people, to individuals to go do creative, civic-minded work throughout the city. And so much of what that project was about for me personally was, I used to say, this is about democratizing the Rolodex. This is taking the people that generally don't have access to philanthropy. We're widening that net. We're trying to bring the money to the people. We're trying to sort of off the 11th floor onto the first floor, all of this kind of stuff. And we got stuck a lot, Mary, in what you're saying, in a power dynamic, because at the end of the day, we still had the resources. And at the end of the day, as much as I would like to think the 120 people that we funded over 5 years and the 30 interns that I had over 5 years, that there was this real sense of camaraderie. And as much as I said, I want to walk alongside you and help you with this project, we are going to do this, there was always a part of me that was like, but how am I sort of perceived in this case? And am I the person who just holds the purse strings? And so therefore there's a dynamic there. So I don't have any answers either. And that's not just talking specifically about racial solidarity, but the power dynamic there is real, and how to navigate it, so much of it still seems to me to come back to real relationship and trust building relationship. But maybe that's naive. I don't know.
I don't think so. I don't think that's naive at all. In fact, I think that gets at the core of what all of this is about, is relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's a lot to be said for the vulnerability. I mean, here comes this word again. To be in relationship with someone sometimes, well, hopefully all of the time, other relationships are sustained on inauthenticity, right?
Right.
But healthy relationships are sustained on authenticity and vulnerability, because that reminds, each of us, we're human, we're human beings, right? We're fallible, but I'm fallible enough to signal my humanness, but I'm also whole enough to signal that I can be in relationship with you and not damage you or do irreparable damage to you as a person. And so I think when when I think about my own solidarity, it's naming the things I don't know. Like, guess what? I'm bad at this. I don't know. And that signals to people like, all right, well, I can mess with you now since you know
Yeah.
what's up. It's part of it is just naming the inequities and say, guess what? I know that I benefit from colorism privilege. I know that I benefit from the privilege of working as an executive in a nonprofit organization. I know that as a former classical musician, I benefit from, literally performing whiteness. I mean, so there are all of these things that I bring to bear to signal for myself that I know that I benefit from things that have been perceived as inequitable or things that purposely shut people like me out. And somehow I want to believe that when I name that, and I'm speaking for myself, when I name that, I can create more authentic relationships with people and put myself in enough of a place of vulnerability that I can, model for myself and for others what it looks like to name in the interest of, again, like making yourself vulnerable to have authentic relationships.
Yeah, that's good.
When
Naming things. Go on.
yeah, and what comes to mind for me with naming things, because we were talking about the tenant-landlord relationship and the people's liberty relationship with the grantees and stuff. So like if I have enough resources that I can live a decent life, then I don't need to count on you or your charity or your kindness to live. So is a tenant-landlord thing, like if we have a contract that you pay rent and then we take care of the property and you have a place to live. And if you have the resources to live, then it feels like there's not as much of a power dynamic there, because then you could choose to go somewhere else if I'm not delivering on my end. But it's when someone doesn't have enough resources that then that's where it all falls apart. And that's what I feel like we need to work. I want to work on is making sure that everyone has what they need, and sort of, and others don't have too much, because that will level things, or I won't need you if you're not going to treat me right because I have enough. So I do want us or movements to take action to justify, to write some of that so that people have we all have what we need to live.
That's very interesting. It brings me back to the very first question when you asked, what is solidarity? And something that just popped in my head very instantly was just the equal distribution of resources. Is very, if we had the equal distribution of resources, it would be a lot different, right? And we've known that whenever someone colonizes someone else, they are there to take their resources. That's really the sole purpose of someone colonizing someone else. So the sacrifices that have to be made is, yes, there has been a lot of resources collected. Are we going to be able to risk giving some of these resources and evening out these resources for it to be equal amongst everyone? And that's race, and that's gender, that's age, but how do we make sure that, young people have the same resources as old people? It can go so many ways. Someone that is gay that has the same resources as someone that is not gay, someone that is Black that is someone that is white. We can pitch it any way that we want, but I think that having those same resources, it does give you that luxury that you're talking about, Mary, that you can say, okay, I don't feel like I am being treated correctly here, but this is not my only option. This is not my only way. I'm not pigeonholed. I'm not put inside a corner. So I resonate with that a lot.
Just taking it all in.
Yeah, it's good.
Can I ask you a question, Naima?
Yeah, girl.
I want to ask what you talk. So when you talk about going to you're in the Solidarity Gym. First,
Yeah.
I want to know, are you accepting new members? And the second thing I want to know is when you speak about, unapologetically speaking truth,
Mhm.
can you give any voice to what's shifted? Why now and what?
Huh. It's such a good question. And only because I've thought about it, I have an answer.
Yeah.
I became a mother.
Mm.
I, with the help of my ex-husband, helped bring a beautiful child into this world.
Mm.
And I saw her and we named her. We gave her a traditional Ghanaian name. My ex-husband is from Ghana. And the next name that I gave her was Alima, which is an Arabic word, which means scholar. I had all these hopes and dreams for my beautiful daughter. And it was in that moment of the maternal instincts just kicked in. And along with it came, frankly, a sinking, sobering fear as to what the world that I was bringing this child into. And so what changed for me was life. And the mantle that I know as a mother came along with bringing this life into the world. And so very quickly, I knew that truth telling was no longer an option. And so over, my child is 9 now. It took me some ramp up, okay? But the evolution of that today has manifested in aligning my work, aligning the people that I choose to surround myself with people who can rest in the uncomfortability of truth. Because of course, everything changes with the truth. And what I also know is this very powerful quote, which is that an organized lie is far more powerful than a disorganized truth. And so I've been working for years and years to get to a place where I was free. I mean, really free to say the things that need to be said in front of everyone. And here's what I've noticed. Here's a lesson that I've learned. It may feel uncomfortable. And when you speak the truth, it's like you can't go back to not, like, you just keep your mouth open all the time. And so that's why I call it like a gym.
Yeah. I
I liken it to what it feels like when you do something over and over and over again. It becomes second nature, it becomes natural. And that, that's what shifted for me, was becoming a mom.
Yeah, thank you.
What about you, Mary? What shifted for you?
Well, it shifted for me in terms of racial solidarity and recognizing white privilege and things like that. A lot of things. To try to name just 2, I guess, as and some of them are really sort of ridiculous and superficial. So I'll just share a few and then do with what you will with them. But I was a social worker back in the late 80s and for the County Department of Human Services. And through a series of different events, eventually I became the housing specialist. And so if a family was referred to the system in children's services for abuse or neglect and housing was a problem, they got referred to me and we tried to find housing. And so I would have these experiences where women would be sitting across the desk from me. And I was a person, and I am a person who's made mistakes in my life. And, but I was always presumed to be innocent, or not innocent, but like, okay. And like, oh, well, that was just a glitch. She's, you know, just give her a second or third chance. So when I sit across from a woman who has brown skin, and she made similar mistakes, but I mean, everything got derailed. Or it would be like we were laughing at the same jokes, or I would notice on her birth certificate she was born at the same hospital as me in the same year. You know, it was like, how did I end up here and you end up there? So it just started clicking that it was because of the color of my skin that I've been treated differently. And then other things like, so I'm 6'3", you know, and I went to a volleyball game once where Gabby, I can't think of her last name, but this beautiful, gorgeous model woman was there. So I could see someone who looked like me, who was beautiful and powerful, because I'd always felt like, you know, a dork or a misfit because I'm different. So I knew that seeing yourself in places made a difference to me. So I knew seeing yourself in positions of power and authority is important. And then started, you know, social work, got involved with Over the Rhine folks who were all justice minded. And I think I shared this. So one time after Timothy Thomas was killed, I went to a class over in Northern Kentucky University on racism, and the professor was African-American, a doctor, and he started his talk that day by saying, because of the color of my skin, some of you will not think I'm qualified to be here talking to you today. He was an African-American teacher, that he's not qualified even though he's got his PhD. And I recognized that in myself. So that shocked me awake to my own racism. And one more example, just Jade California Cooper, who's a novelist. I was reading her book that my friend Bonnie had turned me on to. This was like 25 years ago. And in that book, it's a story of a family who's captured in Africa and brought over as slaves. And it's the story of their family as they move through slavery. And in that story, you know, the enslaved women of color were giving birth to white children. So where did this narrative come from that Black men are dangerous, when it's the Black women who are being raped by the white men? And there was a piece of the story about that. And it just again, jolted me awake. And yeah, and I have one more that's ridiculous, and I hope I'm not embarrassing myself, but being 6'3", the story of our culture that men have to be taller than women in relationships. So I just started to question, like, that was all part of all the questioning, like, is what I've been told all these years true? And it just starts to make you think that, okay, no, the man doesn't have to be taller than the woman. No, you don't have to be the same race to be in love with each other. No, capitalism doesn't work for everyone. No, you know, your elected officials aren't looking out for everyone's best interest. You know, you just start to question everything, and then you want to know more and read more. And so that's some of the things that have helped me to grow, change.
So I have a question for Meg, actually.
Okay.
So, you know, it's funny. I tend to think about organized religion as one of the biggest bulwarks against inequity. And I say that fully aware that, at least when it came to Black people, for instance, Christianity was used as a justification for slavery, right? And yet I look at faith leaders in the civil rights movement, I look at faith leaders today at the forefront of the work. So there's sort of a dichotomy there. But as you sort of enter the space shepherding a community of believers, right, particularly through the lens of Christianity, like, how do you interrogate that mantle? How do you interrogate that mantle in a time of racial awakening?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of some of the work a number of folks in our particular community are sort of embarking on now, is that sort of truth telling. And particularly in the American white evangelical context, what are the things that have not been said for a long time? So I think there's some of that work happening that feels hopeful, like it's a move in the right direction. You know what, though, I think for me personally, you know, it would be hard for me to have a conversation around reconciliation and solidarity by not having this spiritual element in there, because, and this is just my belief, so I hope I don't put anybody off. But, you know, for me, like the core, like the belief for me is that we are all made in the divine image of God. And the work that I see in the world, the activity I see of God in the world, is a reconciling force. Whether you call it God or the work of the universe, or you don't have a particular faith tradition, the belief for me is that God is making all things new, reconciling all things together, bringing all things back to himself. That's a reconciling force, a peacemaking. You know, I've mentioned the word on our prep call, shalom. It's harmony, it's oneness, it's a bringing together. And so I don't know that you can claim the gospel, Christian tradition, you know, that you can claim the gospel without being engaged in the work of reconciliation across lines of race, across lines of gender, across lines of class, you name it. So it's sort of like, it's this to me. Now, we haven't gotten it right because so much of what, you know, organized religion is it's human beings institutionalizing things. But the core to me of the gospel is a message of hope, reconciliation, and peace, shalom. And so if we're not doing that, I think we're missing something.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that is a really profound point. And you talk about exploring sort of the truthiness of things, right? There is a dichotomy there to be explored when it comes to faith. And I was just reading here, Leona Hawley says the intersection of religion and oppression is one that needs to be explored and dismantled. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. But I tend to agree with you that the work of spirit, in whatever way you conceive it, right? I believe that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And if you believe that too, then there must be some role that spirit plays in advancing us towards some racial reconciliation, truth telling, and holding ourselves within, you know, the deep waters and sort of troubled pain that comes along with. So on that very deep note, we're going to transition to audience questions. And I think our friend G. Horton and co-host of Urban Consulate is going to help us with some questions. Ooh, these are good. First question. This goes back to this notion that we introduced at the very beginning, which is that exercising or practicing solidarity comes at a cost and at a risk. And there is also a need and a benefit. Doesn't the benefit enable us to take risks? Such a good question. Thank you, Meg. Meg Brook, I think, or Meg Brook. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm going to give that one to Peace.
Yes, I would definitely say you have that same type of thought process in mind, but I also know that there is doubt and there is fear. And there are also two powerful attributes that weigh in heavy on a lot of the decisions that we make to kind of get involved with different things. I think it's very similar to the person that asked the question, like, yes, the benefit outweighs anything. I know what the outcome is, but there's You have to get uncomfortable with yourself in order to do that. And you have to be comfortable getting uncomfortable. And a lot of people haven't reached that point. There's not been a lot of times where I don't want to do something that I know may benefit me because it may be hard at that specific moment. So I understand why a lot of people may not be doing it, because they fear that they may risk something that they may not want to lose. But I think solidarity requires sacrifice. And so I'm in agreement with the person that just asked that question. I think, yes, it does outweigh the risk. The benefit always outweighs the risk, especially when you know that ultimately is going to not just help you, but help the whole.
Mm. I want to, this question has me like shook right now. And that is from Mary Ellen Mitchell. Mary Ellen Mitchell, thank you for this question. She asks, what if the cost for speaking truth takes funding away from your organization, essentially taxing the poor for your truth telling? It's an interesting correlation that you're building here, Mary. I think I get your point, but I'm gonna give this one to Meg only because
No.
Did I give it to Mary? Somebody take it.
Wait, let's all talk about it. That's man. I don't want to shy away, but I'm not sure I have an answer. Man.
Well, I have some thoughts on this.
Yeah. Come on, philanthropy.
Well, so
Speak on it.
it's such a good question. And, there is a cost benefit to speaking the truth now. Let's just be very clear about that. But at the end of the day, either you take a stand or you don't, right? And so organizations are being challenged and stretched to do this very work today. So I think if people, if an organization asserts itself as an anti-racist organization and suddenly a major funding says, oh, I agree with everything except your assertion that you're an anti-racist organization, take it out, or I take $1 million away. Well, what does a principal leader do in that instance, right? And so how do we interrogate our position within the sort of firmament of equity to be able to guide that decision-making? And at the end of the day, what solidarity may look like for you is keeping that money and doing something good with it and changing it and saying, okay, well, we're going to amend that and take this woman's money and do something great with it. But solidarity for an organization could also look like, this is a non-negotiable for us, and you may take your money. And we know that this stance might alienate our supporters. But if we don't take a stand, then who will? So I think there are different paths you can take. So that's just how I interrogate that question.
That's so funny. I've ran into something very similar a lot of times, and me and Siri, we always talk about it. Like, there is no big I's and no little U's, or no right or no wrong way when it comes to like change, when it comes to the revolution. Whether if somebody is on the front lines and they're using their voice and they're speaking the loudest that they can, and they're the most visible person, or you have somebody that's pushing a pen in the back and they've never been seen, that does not give me, if I'm on the front line, I shouldn't put myself in a position where I feel like I am better or worse than anybody else that is doing the work as well, because it all needs to be done. And I think that's what has to happen. There has to be someone on the ground. There has to be someone that's hitting them in the legal way. There's different levels to it, and we can't just say that solidarity is just one way. And I think that's kind of the beauty about it, right? We can't just have one person doing one simple thing, and because if that was the route, then I think we would just do it. Right. But there are so many different levels and so many different ways that we have to attack it, and we also have to support each other when it comes to someone doing it, something that it may not be the way that I think it should be, but they are also trying to strive and they are trying to get to the same goal as me. So not tearing someone else down because they're not they're not doing the work that looks exactly like yours. But taking the time to understand that this all needs to be done and being grateful and saying, I may not be able to do it this way. So in specific, when it comes to like the funding and the money, like I think, like you said, it's specifically to your cause and like how you stand. Cause I know a lot of people that can turn the other cheek, get the money, and now that can affect thousands and millions, and it can be very beneficial. But if they were to go with a closed hand, then it may not have had the same result. And some people who are very stern, and that sternness also rippled. It was a ripple effect, and it showed the message, and it was something that others were able to resonate with. So I really enjoyed that answer. I think it's an and or thing. It's an and thing, actually.
Yeah, it just strikes me, and it just takes some, like, there's a lot of discernment, and wisdom sometimes required for these types of choices, particularly when you're, leading an organization or trying to lead through change. It's such a good question. And faced with something that, like, you have to count the costs. And to your point, Naima and Peace, it can look a lot of different ways. But I think it takes some really good discernment sometimes, right? If it's not so cut and dry, we probably wouldn't be having these conversations, right? If it was just sort of one way. But well, such a good question.
So Mary Ellen had another question, but I'm actually going to ask another one and come back to Mary Ellen. Don't worry, Mary Ellen, we're going to come back. Chase Cantrell from the west side of Detroit. Is it west side? There's this really friendly competition going back and forth between two of our urban consulate counterparts in Detroit, between east side and west side, and is wonderful. But Chase Cantrell asks, solidarity often feels framed as leveraging power, i.e. standing alongside, supporting, fighting with, using power for something for good, but rarely is it framed as giving up power or transferring power altogether. How do we know when solidarity is giving up power partially or completely? Is that in and of itself a form of solidarity?
That's good.
Mary? I'm kicking that one to Mary.
Oh, thank you. It's like in my head, don't pick me, don't pick me. Yeah, I think so. I think that's really powerful solidarity, surrendering some power to benefit the whole or to benefit the other. So I'm trying to think of an example. And I don't know if this works, but like that funding example, would it be that the different organizations are in solidarity? So we believe that ending white privilege is a value that we all share. And so if a funder says that you have to take that part out of your mission statement, that we collectively amongst the groups, the nonprofits say, well, we won't agree to that. I don't know if that's sharing power really, or an easy way out of the question. So I think about it in our work as a person who works for an organization that owns property where people live. So what would giving up power in that scenario look like, and how would it be an example of solidarity?
Housing equity, right? It isn't part of it, giving people a pathway to owning property. That's power, real estate.
Right.
Way.
Yeah. How does that work? What does it look like? So there's a hybrid called renter equity that we've attempted over the past 15 to 20 years. I mean, some of it falls back to our economic system. We're really making $10 an hour. You can't, it's so hard to,
Right.
even if something is given, like how do you maintain it? So it's a struggle to figure out how to make an owner when someone's income is so low. So, you know, getting wages up is part of the story, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, we could have a whole conversation about how income has not kept pace with the cost of housing, the increase in
Yes,
cost of
yes.
housing, and what that burden that regular Americans bear under those settings. But I'm going to ask this other question. Yeah, go ahead, Meg.
I think just to chase this question, I mean, yeah, like I think it fundamentally has to be a giving up, a shifting, like a getting out of the seat and giving the seat to somebody else, handing over these resources so that somebody else can thrive. I think that's the part where, we didn't talk about this when we talked about risk earlier, but I think that's where I was going earlier when I said there's a cost. And it's not just a relational cost, there's a real cost. Like, and do I feel the cost? That's often what I'm trying to excavate is like, was this just a move that kind of made me feel good? Like, oh, now I'm in solidarity. Or does this actually cost me something? Like, did this cost me a job? Did this cost me resources? And that's the kind of feeling that I think, just speaking as a white woman, white person, that's what I think I want to be leaning more into. And I think we all need to be leaning more into is I am in certain places and have access to certain networks and have certain resources for no reason other than the color of my skin. And so what do I do with that? There has to be, I mean, we had a day conversation on reparation back in August. And I think that's something more to be explored. But on a personal level, I think that's what I'm often thinking about is like, if it's a true surrender, if it's a true letting go, if it's a true emptying of something, then it has to leave me, which will hurt. It will be painful. But that's often how I think about some of that, Chase. And I'm not saying I'm good at it. I'm just saying that's something I'm constantly mindful of.
So this question comes to us from our very own master of tech guru, JP. He's the captain of everything you see here with Zoom and Facebook Live. What signs of solidarity have surprised you most recently in your work or life? Peace. Signs of solidarity that have surprised you recently.
More recently, I started like the nonpartisan campaign during like the time of election, and there was a lot of people that came out and showed up, and in particular, there was about 2 or 3 white women that we were working with, and we had to put on an event together. And I was very surprised and very refreshed also because when we began to talk, we were sharing ideas, we were speaking on things, and the first thing that they were saying was, well, we kind of just want to shut up and, have you guys talk and have you guys lead, ultimately because it was a cause that we cared deeply about that was affecting us, and they were wanting to help. But sometimes when you want to help, you can project what it is you think needs to be done. So when they said, no, I think we're going to, have you guys lead and, you tell us what it is that you need us to do. It was very refreshing because it was less pressure and it felt like real help, right? It was like, let's figure out what it is that we need. And then whatever it is that I can do, then I'll make sure I can get that resource for you. So you let me know what that resource is. And it was a great relationship and it was a very successful outcome as well. But I was very surprised, older white women as well. And they, they kind of jokingly said it, kind of was like, no, we're gonna let you guys, handle this one. But I heard him, and I respected it, and it was different, but it was surprising, yes, but it was a good surprise.
Might that also be an example of giving up power, right?
Right.
Doing something different from what is expected. Yeah, that is such a great question. Here's another one. So not exactly sure who this is from, but I'm going to read it. I agree with Mary that many white people can choose comfort over courage without immediate material costs and usually benefits. But there are costs for white people. What are they? And why don't more white people see them? So in other words, let me say it in a different way, right?
Yeah.
The entire ocean is wet, right? So when here's what I imagine, right?
Yeah.
In any scenario in life, when we sort of turn a blind eye to racism, we all suffer, whether you're white or black. Racism is oppressive for everybody. Just different groups happen to feel it differently, and
Right.
there's disproportionate impact of racism on Black and brown people. So why is it that more white people don't see that the body politic of racism, like, what happens to the pinky impacts, the whole body? Why? It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
I'll venture an answer, because I don't think that for the most part we aren't harmed by it. I mean, I can have a place to live. I don't have to worry about, if I had a white son that would go out and run a red light or get pulled over, that he would be at risk. I mean, I just feel like we don't experience it, the harm of racism. It's not good for our collective spirit, our collective economies, but it doesn't, on a personal level, we don't experience the downside of it unless we love people of color. They're in our families or in our circles, and we know that they're at risk.
Can I add on to that, Mary? I think often we don't perceive the harms because they're heart level. So like on the surface, we could sort of say, yeah, this doesn't impact me. Racism doesn't impact me because I'm a white person, so it doesn't feel as urgent. But the harm gets back to that soul level, heart level stuff. The fact that like we are all connected, and what harms you harms me. That it's harder to go there, I think, for a lot of individuals. And so I think that the question's brilliant, and it's a core question. I think for white people, when we think that somehow this is it's not a problem that impacts us, we've just totally missed it. It is. And we don't understand it that way, and so it doesn't feel as urgent. Well, this doesn't impact me, but it does.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll just add that there's a very good reason why some white people may not see it, is because part of the narrative is that the positioning of whiteness is like the pinnacle of sort of human existence. But when you disaggregate sort of social hierarchy and economic hierarchy, and we examine poor whites who do in fact feel the crunch of economic inequity, which comes as a result of a lot of our racist economic policies, they feel it. And yet, because the identity of whiteness is that's a card that is so valuable. And And then when we also examine some of the initial sort of reasoning behind slavery and racism in this country, the system of racism and white supremacy was not really designed. It was certainly designed to keep Black and brown people oppressed, but it wasn't designed to control us as much as it was designed to control poor whites.
Mm.
And so we have an elite class of plutocrats who existed to create a system to control white people, to prevent solidarity and to prevent class solidarity. And so there's that dynamic that we need to examine as well. Another good question. So,
Oh, can I add one thing?
oh yeah.
I think also like there's certain people that have come into power that have, you know, created an illness, right? Have had a certain mental illness, who would not be able to see anything that like we may be able to see that we're kind of seeing clearly. And I think when you change the currency into a piece of paper instead of the human connection, is when you begin to lose your integrity with humans.
Right.
If we look at each other as dollar signs, then it's kind of easy to not care about each other, or, you know, but when we look at the currency, the true currency is within the human connection and how we connect with others, then we will begin to elevate, because that is the real currency. The greater that we work with each other, that's the original currency, honestly. But we kind of are blind to that, looking at it in that way. So I think that's what we're ultimately losing. That's the cost. The cost is that we're not even tapping into the true currency of ourselves and of each other, and the possibilities and the exploration of the things that we can be doing together. Doing a lot now, but we could be doing even greater things. I think if we were to set aside some of the capital ways we look at each other.
Well, we've got one final question from our audience, for the group. And it's for Mary and Meg. What does conversation look like when you're in powerful, homogenous spaces with no Black or brown representation, where decisions may be made affecting those that aren't present? In essence, how do you show solidarity when we're not in the room?
Can you read the first part of it again?
Yeah.
Thanks.
What does the conversation look like when you're in powerful, homogenous spaces with no Black and brown representation, where decisions may be made affecting those that aren't present? In essence, how do you show solidarity when we're not in the room? And by we're, I assume that whoever's asking this great question means Black and brown people.
Yeah. I'll speak a little bit, Mary, please. I mean, I think in those instances, and I have been in those rooms, I think the first question is, why are there no Black and brown people in this room? And so to kind of bring that forth and to acknowledge that as a starting point, or whatever the case might be, if we're making a decision on behalf of someone experiencing homelessness, why is nobody whose life is impacted by this in the room? That's an unpopular question to ask, I've learned, but I think it's an interesting one to start in. Mm-hmm. And then I guess if you know, it's a situation where decisions are being made and that's not a reality or something that we can change. I mean, I guess in a lot of ways, like I would hope that there's been sufficient listening on behalf of the people who are making the decisions to be able to make a choice or make a decision that feels in line with what the particular group is who we're making the decision for would want. And that would be I mean, to me, that's sort of the second go. But I think for all of this sort of stuff, I think these are moments to pause, and it's moments to pay attention, to say, we need to name the reality. We need to name who is not in the room that needs to be in the room. And in some cases, let's not make the decisions until those individuals are in the room.
Hmm.
And I'm hopeful that more of that, like there are more opportunities for those kind of exchanges to be happening. I think it's becoming more commonplace for somebody to be like, can we just sort of look at what's happening here? And I think that's leading to some change. So
Huh.
that's sort of how I would kind of answer that.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's good. And I think what you had indicated, May, that it's not a popular question is sometimes when we're in the powerful homogenous rooms, I'm not the most powerful person. So I could be marginalized by bringing up who's not in the room, or wait a minute, shouldn't we be doing something different? Yeah, you can quickly be marginalized. But sometimes it's just noticing it too, even if it's among peers that I respect, and I think that we're all acting in the best interest. It's a good question. Like, so what are we doing that we don't have those voices in the room?
Mhm.
And then we talk about it. So I really am that we do need to take some action. I think
Yeah.
moving
And
from the conversation to action, get the
Yeah.
people in the room.
I think some of that goes back to what, this group's been sort of sharing even before this call, was sort of like, if we're talking about solidarity as a posture and a practice, or we're talking about, some of these things, I think to be able to lead with those values and to be able to sort of say like, this is the mandate, like we're not going to make choices until this room looks as it should, And again, those aren't easy conversations to have by any means, but I'm more hopeful that, I'm just speaking from a little bit of experience in some particular rooms in Cincinnati, and I'm hopeful that people are more open to those conversations, and not just to the conversations, but actually changing. So that gives me some hope.
I'd like to bring up a quick example. I was working with Children's Hospital, and they were doing something as far as the mortality rate, and they were dealing with a lot of women of color and that were pregnant. And they came and they asked us to kind of join their campaign, get the word out. And it was really male dominated, people that was in the room at this that I brought to work with. And instantly we were like, we need women on this board. I don't know anything about pregnancy. I'm not even going to fake the funk like I do. But it helped us so much, I'm not, and I think it was kind of a no brainer there, but it's very similar. Like, stop everything. Like because it's not going to actually help, right? If we're not, trying to boil down and get to the, like, if anything, it was going to help my ego or help the people that was a part of the event. Oh, look what we did. But ultimately, we need somebody that's sitting in there that is trying to, relate, that can relate, that is making those longevity changes as well. And it's, once again, being able to sacrifice, putting your ego to the side, being able to say, yeah, I don't have all of the answers, and it's okay.
Yeah.
But I know that I can step aside and I can ask, and we could bring in the right people that do, and I can work alongside with, and I could bring resources to them so they can ultimately help themselves.
Yeah. And it's like what we started this conversation with, like just naming it. I think it's been said that the one who can name reality as it's happening will emerge as the leader. And so I think even to recognize that, like, the people that we need to be leading right now do not look like who's leading right now. And it's going to be the ones who have to have that courage to say, maybe something needs to change here. And those are the people that emerge as the leaders when you can name reality as it's happening or as it is. And so I think we need to start to see. And that is you all know now, that's my prayer all the time, is like, help me see. I need new eyes to see. And we all need new eyes to see the reality as it is, and as it can be. And so anyway. Take it back, Naima. Sorry, this is your show.
Oh, look, I'm still hanging on to please give me new eyes to see.
Mhm.
What a poignant way to end our evening together, because of course solidarity is sometimes about just listening and discovering and seeing and sensing. And so what a fitting way to end. Thank you. And leave it to Meg, our spiritual director, to end on such a note. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And of course, I'd like to thank all of our amazing guests, Mary Rivers, Megan Trischler, and Peace, for engaging in a very different dialogue. This is something that we have not done quite this way before. So thank you for stepping into a place of vulnerability. And for those out there in Facebook land, thank you for witnessing it. And thank you for your good questions. So this marks the final Urban Consulate Salon of 2020. And what a year it has been. I hope we're all looking ahead to 2021 for renewal, recovery, and healing in so many senses of that word. I certainly am. And with that, I send each of you greetings, holiday greetings, winter greetings, and so much love and healing, again, recovery into the new year. I am also going to share with the audience out in Facebook land, we have some incredible Urban Consulate programs coming up. We want you to make sure that you don't miss them. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and subscribe to our email list at urbanconsulate.com. Here are some updates on our future programs. This Wednesday at 7 o'clock, we'll have another installment of Practicing Racial Equity, hosted by my man, Orlando Bailey, our counterpart in Detroit, Urban Consulate Detroit. Special guest for this talk will be Courtney Smith of Detroit Phoenix Center and Cindy Eggleton of Brilliant Detroit. This talk will be live streamed on Facebook. Super easy to dial in. You won't want to miss this. This series is extraordinary. Also save the date for Tuesday, January 19th. National holiday. It is the National Day of Racial Healing, and we are very thrilled to partner with the University of Cincinnati's Truth, Racial Healing and Reconciliation Center for an interactive dialogue on practicing racial empathy. This will take place at 2:30 Eastern as part of a full day of programming produced by the TRHC. Sign up today at urbanconsulate.com/events. And lastly, save the date for Wednesday, February 10th at 8 p.m. Central. Join Courageous Conversations. The topic is love, anger, and apology. The special guest for this particular talk will be Valerie Kaur, founder of the Revolutionary Love Project and author of See No Stranger, followed by an interactive dialogue. So you won't want to miss this. Tickets cost $15, so register at courageouscommunity.us today, now. And once again, sending you a wonderful, happy, warm, healing, beautiful winter and happy new year. Thanks so much, guys.
Look at the stars. I guess they're really not that far. I sing Kofa, sing Kofa. It's a new dawn, a new day.
Remembering days that we used to play around the way, no bullets were stray. We would sweat box all day, few arguments with the old heads. For the most part, we would obey. Barbecue days, laughing away. See your cousin every holiday. Blockbusters on a Saturday. shop, talking shit to your barber. Still a report card to get to your mama. Squad up at the school to see drama. Living life free without no karma. Remembering days, remembering days. Yeah.
Friday morning, wake up starving, pull up with the pop tart. Late to school, I'm always late, so mama whoop my ass hard. Algebra ain't speaking to me, fucking up my heart. Chakra chest was aching, mama worry took me to a hard doctor. Maybe it's the Grippos, I don't know. Or maybe the pop rocks, my God. But shit, my addiction to hip hop. Up on YouTube all night, I can't stop. Got 5 more minutes on my phone, but it's almost 9. Gotta re up on a yellow car, walking down Vine, and my car just dropped. Put my baby online, then I call her, fall asleep at the drop of a dime. I remember what my